I will teach you all about curtain motor position feedback with a 402 motor. So this is a CMA-402, but it also applies to the CMD-402, which is a blue gearbox rather than this black one. So this 402 footprint is just telling you that it sort of looks like this. Ooh, and there the pieces fall. The motor is hooked up. This one right here is 120 volt because it comes in 240, 110 volt AC, and 24 volt DC. So we have three options for you to pick on voltage. And then it also has the option for pot feedback or potentiometer feedback, which is simply a fancy way of saying you can use a meter and tell what position the curtain is at. And you use that on ventilation control systems where you want to be able to remotely see where it's at, or your control scheme relies on the controller knowing exactly where it's at, because the alternative is just guessing where it's at based on time. So if you want to actually know, you have to use pot feedback, and these motors have that option. So as you're looking at it here, these two knobbies are the limit switches. So if I run this, let me turn it on. So now the motor is running, and so as it goes up the side of the barn, it's got to stop at the right spot. So you use these limits to set that. Let me turn it off, and I'm going to go the other way. So now it's running the other way. So you use these limits right here to set where it stops at the bottom and where it stops at the top, because this type of motor rides up and down on the bottom. It hangs off the curtain and rolls up with the curtain, and that is actually more convenient than trying to use jack shafts. And getting back to the position feedback, it comes with a bunch of gears, because the position feedback and the limit switches are two separate systems. On the back end, the same little gear drives it with the shaft, but after that, they're two separate systems. And when you set the limit switch, you also have to set up the pot. And it's a little bit confusing, and this video will show you what to do so you're not as confused. So every time the output shaft turns, this shaft turns about one time. It's about a 1-to-1 ratio. And then this is a pot feedback. Now the catch is with a pot feedback, it's a 10-turn pot. You can get 1 turn and 10 turns basically. So this is turning 1 time, then you put this on here, then it gears it down, because what happens is you want to adjust the gain of this to about match your curtain opening, because it's a volt. It's just giving it a variable resistance, and if it only moves just a little bit, so if this has to wrap, say, 10 times, if you gear it down too far, this gear only goes like from there to there, and then your controller can't tell what's happening. So you want this to move a nice amount of its range so you get a nice voltage feedback that's easy to understand. But in order for that a nice range, that depends on how tall your curtain is. So if a tall curtain, this shaft could go around up to 40 times. A short one, the motor shaft might only go around about 5 times. So that's this whole thing that you have to keep in mind, and I'll show you here. So how these will usually ship is no gears on here, but sometimes if we know the application, we will set it up. So first off, if you're starting off and there's no gears on here, you would set it up and set your limit switches. Then you would come on and find the most appropriate gears, and the most appropriate gears are going to be based off of how many turns you want on here in relationship to your building. Somebody's going to ask me, well, what should I just stick on? Well, it's your calculations. You got to see how tall of a curtain. Normally we'd put like from the smallest to the biggest here, and that's going to cover most installations. There's numbers on them. This was a 19 and a 37. So that's going to halve the speed. So since this is a 10, so if it's halving the rotations, a 37 and a 19, and this will do 10 turns, that means this shaft could do 20 turns total if you use like a 19 and a 37, very, very roughly. But what happens is, so I'm telling you, you can do 10 turns. I'm turning it here. If you try to turn it beyond 10 turns, you will cause bad things to happen, because these are plastic gears. So it's plastic gears with these brass lock rings. There's real little set screws in there. So you set this up, and then you put them in. And you got to think of this pot as a spiral in a barrel. So you got a barrel, I'm thinking like an old keg, and you got this spiral line in it, and it'll go around 10 times from the bottom till it unscrews the whole way to the top. And as the curtain goes down, you kind of wind in towards the back, and if you run it past the back, it'll hit, and it'll either strip the gears or slide on the shaft. Whichever happens depends on how tight you made the brass ring. So that's why I say you need to be awake for this. Anybody can do it, but they have to be aware of their world, because when the curtain's at the bottom, you would turn this back the whole way against, and then come front about 1 turn and put your gears on and then run it up again. That should get you a nice range. And you just gotta, I wish I had some really easy way that you'll never mess up. This is a 10-turn spiral, and you have to look at the gears, count how many times around the shaft is going for your particular installation, and then compare that to how many times this is going to turn. You put a mark on here with a Sharpie, and then you can tell what's happening. So that's the main gist of it. Get the limit switches set, then put the gears on, and then you have these 3 wires. So you've got this set up. So you've got 3 wires here. They're labeled 1, 2, and 3, and a pot. When I talk about a spiraled barrel, a potentiometer is simply a variable resistor, kind of like a wiper. So if this was at the one end of my arm was going in a spiral, and this was 1, and this would be 3 on here for the one end versus the other. And then that wiper in the middle is number 2. And that number 2 goes back to your controller and tells it how far open, because it just gives it the voltage. It just tells it how close it is from one end to the other. If you ohm it out, you can easily tell. You'll have half the ohms in the middle, and as you come over this way, you'll have 25% of the ohms here and 3/4 of the ohms here. So this is used on a lot of different applications. Often it's 10 volts. This would be at ground, and that'd be at 10 volts. And then as this wiper spirals down the barrel, it'll get closer and closer to 10 volts till it gets to the end. But you got to get that thing set up at the right spot for when you start, because if you're at close to the bottom end and you don't have the gears on right, you'll jam it back in and break things up back here. Or better case, it'll just slip. But if you make all the slip rings really tight, it's almost surely going to break one of the plastic gears in here. So that might sound like you should never use this. Me, as a manufacturer and the support for it, you can use it, it works, but you just have to be aware of it. It's kind of a race car, and you have to know how to use how race car drivers think. And it would be it's going through my mind, it would be handier if that pot was just a single turn and it would go over center. But the catch with that is you still would have to align it. So I'm just letting you know we're daydreaming of a better way to do it. But for the moment, having this spiraled pot and having to pay attention to where you're at within the spiral is the best we can do for you. My name is Kevin Hoover, and we make ventilation control systems for dairy and livestock. If you've got questions, you can send us an email or text us on our main line at 610-987-0488. If you want more information on ventilation or fans, I got a book on Amazon. It's actually 2 books, one about the fans and one about the ventilation controllers. I wrote everything I know about controllers as of the end of 2025. And if you go on there, you can find it, and your life will become better the more you know about cows and controllers.